Hey guys, welcome back to the workbench. Welcome to part 2 of the CLSX 501 hopper car weathering video. So in the last video we did some of the base patching work on the sides of the car, most of the hand painted stuff. At this point we're ready to move into the spray patches, which I'm going to be doing. They're going to be pretty complex, but I'm going to be demonstrating masking techniques and spraying techniques in this next part. So we got a lot to talk about. Let's get right into this video. Okay guys, here's where we are now with the project. As you can see, we got the borders painted on, and this is just some buff painted acrylic, and I just basically brushed this on in light washes and built it up in progressive little layers until I got a nice even patchwork with basically no brush stroke. With as complex as this mask job is going to be, I want to use a tape that's not going to rip up the sides, damage the paint patching that we've already done, because remember, we have these paint patches underneath that I don't want to disturb. So it's very important that we use a tape here that's relatively low tech, but still has enough tech that it's going to stick to the sides of this car. Obviously we're dealing with a car too that has a lot of ribs that we're going to have to work around. This is going to be an issue, and we need to make sure that we have the tape tucked around all these corners as tightly as possible to eliminate any kind of possibility of overspray or anything on the areas we don't want the white patching on. So the tape I'm going to be using is Scotch Blue Painter's tape. This is what I've been using for years. It's great tape to use. However, you need to have a clean surface, and you need to make sure you have a fresh, sharp hobby knife blade to cut this with. You need to make sure your cuts are clean, and you got to try to keep as much of this tack on the tape as possible. I recommend if you have a glass plate, use that. Unfortunately, I do not. I usually just put it out on my mat, but I try to make sure that my mat is nice and clean so I don't get any debris on the tape itself. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a large strip like this, and I'm going to pull a strip out that is the length of the car, in this case this long, and I'm just going to go ahead and remove this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this piece of tape pretty far back, and again I know it looks pretty dirty and it's pretty beat up, but I did polish this mat off so that it's clean. And I'm going to put the tape along one of these guidelines. This is where it gets a little bit tricky, but I'm going to try to trace out the exact pattern that I need for the masking, and I'm using a ballpoint pen here. And I'm just going to very carefully start putting in the lines based on where I need to guide them here. And I'm trying to keep the car body relatively close by so I see where I need to work these lines around. And in this case I'm starting in this corner here, working on the patches above the yellow patched area here. And it's just very tricky. And it does take some time, but just go slow. Of course, if you need to redo this, it's very easy. Just move above and then you can retrace your lines out. But I'm just going to basically be doing this to recreate the pattern. I'll come back and show you guys what this looks like after I'm done with this. I also recommend, when you do this, don't try to knock out the whole thing. Do this in small sections at a time. The patching goes in all kinds of various shapes and sizes on the car body, so I'm going to be cutting this up in a lot of different portions until I get everything pieced back together. You can do this in one full sheet, however, getting all the dimensions and everything accurate in one go is very hard. I've tried it before, and it takes a lot of effort, and it usually results in you having to do it a couple times. So just try to, I recommend if you're going to, like I said, do this yourself, try to do it in smaller chunks, and then just work your way across the car in various layers, and then piece all the masking together to get what you need. So as you can see, I put the first strip of tape down, and it's just coming over the rib now, and you can see that little space between the patch. And basically I'm going to put another piece of tape right here to cover up the yellow, and this little area here is going to be just a little bit of that white coming through here. It's important as you go over rib sections of cars like this that you take the tape and then tighten it down over the edges first like this, and then you can work it over the side like this. But just make sure this is all very tight, because we really don't want any of that paint bleeding. We want this to look pretty tight here. If we do get paint bleeding underneath the tape, we can go back and fix that later, but I really want to try to prevent as much of that happening as possible. So just make sure you take your time with this, and just make sure you burnish your tape edges and everything so that it's very nice and tight here. After about 30 minutes, here's what I got done so far. I got to start now piecing all this in down the sides, working down the sides, so we got quite a bit of work to go, but this is what I got done so far. I just got to piece in some more tape up here I'll start filling that in, and I'm going to start blocking all this off down here a little bit because I got to paint this area and I don't want to get paint on the underbody that we've just weathered up, so I'm going to cover that up as well. But that's where I'm at right now. Alright, this is what everything looks like after it's been masked up. Wow. Yeah, this took a long time. This took about an hour and a half to do this. I had to basically cut each individual piece of tape to the length I needed, make all the little adjustments, and then all these other little pieces of filler tape had to be carefully put in. A lot of grafting, a lot of cutting, a lot of grafting over the ribs especially. That's a lot of work. And then all this detail work around these areas here where I got to repaint it. And then I masked off the underbody here. And then you got all the really complex stuff around the data patches and everything in that corner there. And then there's a cutout here where the rib got touched up with some of that paint too. So I'm only going to do one side at a time here because of the complexity of the paint. I need to only be able to work on one side. I'm not even going to try to mask this the other side until this is done. So we're going to do one side at a time here is the best way I'm going to be able to approach this. But I'm going to go ahead and start spraying, and we'll see what that looks like after I get it. Alright, this is what the patching looks like after we've gotten the color sprayed. Now, I gotta say that this paint works very well. This is actually the first time I've used this paint, and I found it worked very well for all of this detail work. It applied very smoothly and evenly. This is almost airbrush quality work here, and all this was done with a minimum of 3 very light coats. And it's important with any kind of paint you're using, any kind of enamel-based paint, anything like that, that you do this in very light coats at a time. It's too easy to build up a thick coat very quickly, and then you end up obscuring a lot of these small details, like these rivet details here on these panels, for example. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is start peeling all of this masking off, and we'll take a look at how this came out. Here is the car. Now that we got all the masking tape peeled up, and you can see we got quite a bundle of masking tape here, and it's a very complex project, obviously, and it turned out very good, I gotta say. No incidents, no peeling paint, no damage to the patching, removing the tape. Everything's very clean and crisp, almost like it was made that way. Here's the patching from the side here. Again, it all looks very good, and it all matches the prototype pretty much dead on. We took our time, we did it carefully, and it came out good, and this is the fruits of our labor so far. You can see our nice bordered patching there for our data. It all looks, again, really good. All coming out really nice. And so, if I can pull the photo back up, we'll compare quickly the model that I'm doing the patching based off of, CLSX 501, and we'll compare it to my model right here. So here's the two cars side by side. Pretty cool, huh? At this point, it's really just a matter of duplicating the artwork for the opposite side, which is slightly different from the photos. And then after we get all the work done, I will dull coat everything and seal everything together, and then we can go ahead and start decaling. So I'll go ahead and do the opposite side now, and I'll show you guys what that looks like after I've gotten it taped up here. Here is the opposite side of the 501 here, and it's not as complex in all the data patches and everything, but still a little complex getting everything lined up perfectly on the sides here. And this is where I'm at so far. I just got to tape up the end a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and spray it. But this is where we stand right now. It's looking pretty good. And we're pretty much ready to go. So I'm just going to go ahead and get right into spraying this section here. You just got to watch this tape as you're going, because it has a tendency to pop back up, especially over loose parts like grab irons and things. So I just got to be kind of careful with here. But I'll go ahead and get started, and we'll come back here. Here are the sides now sprayed up. Looking pretty good, just like before. Very nice paint coverage. This was 3 coats total. They're very thin and very nice. I wanted to go ahead and insert this little part into this video, though, because it's something I probably should mention to any newcomers or anyone who wants to try this technique of patching on their cars. When you mask these and once you paint the paint on, you really want to make sure that this dries up very well and very thoroughly. If you don't, and you start trying to peel up some of this tape while the paint's still tacky and still drying, there's a good chance you can pull some of the paint up with the patching and you'll tear off little sections. Especially with cheaper Krylon paints and things like that you might use, this is an extremely high risk. I've learned that the hard way many times. And even with good paints, even with model paints, even if you spray them through the airbrush, you can have a tendency to accidentally pull some up if it's still very tacky. So you want to make sure that you have this paint dry very well before you peel any of this masking up. In this case, I lave both sides to dry for about 2 hours, 2-3 hours, a good long curing time, enough that it'll set up enough that you can peel the tape up and you don't have to worry about peeling any paint off. Of course, I still leave an additional 2 days maximum of absolute cure time before I start messing with any of the paintwork to really make sure that it's on good and hard. For example, on this side here, before I actually started working on the opposite side, I let this side of the car dry up for 2 days before I handled it again. That way, if I could set it down on this side or anything like that, I don't risk scraping up any of this new paint while it's still somewhat tacky. This is good and cured now, so I don't have to worry about it. So that's just some notes I wanted to put out here for any of you guys who are doing this patching. So in the next clip, I'll go ahead and start peeling up this tape, and I'll show you guys a quick clip on that. This is going to be a quick clip about taking the masking back off the model after you've painted it. This has had a couple hours to dry now, and what I like to do is usually go in reverse of the direction that I apply the tape in. So, for example, I started the masking in this corner of the car and worked my way around to this end of the car, the brake end. And so I'm going to be working in reverse now, and I just like to start by taking off the smaller pieces first and just slowly peeling these off, like this. And then when you get to the more fine edges like these here, you want to obviously go a little bit slower. But first just remove all of the tape around a certain piece like that, and then just carefully start at one end at a time and carefully lift the paint up. Don't want to rip this off obviously in one setting, because you'll have a risk of maybe taking some paint up or damaging the side or something like that. So you want to be very careful with this and just be very attentive to that. And just go slow. Here is the opposite side of the car now that we've taken the masking off, and you can see everything's looking pretty good. Looking at my photos, everything's lining up pretty good here so far. I haven't had any incidents. There's a little bit of overspray on the panel here. You can see that little white overspray, but that's not too big a deal. There's some rough lines here and there, but I can cover that up and clean it up a little bit more before I seal it. But at this point, I'm going to let the model sit for a couple days, and I'll let everything really dry up before I start handling and weathering it again. The only other patching I got to do is on the ends. There is a little square of data that they repatched there, obviously with the reporting mark and everything. I'll have to repair that coupler lift bar there. That's not a big deal though. But other than that, we are pretty much ready to go ahead and start working on the meticulous weathering stage of this car. Trying to work around this patching and get everything right. And then I gotta apply the decals. The decals are going to be a little bit tricky on this car because I gotta combine a bunch of different decal sheets and combine splice decals to make the correct accurate data for this car, and to get the reporting marks and the number, because it's all very unique data. So I'm going to have to work on that a little bit next, but I'll show you guys what kind of decals I'll use for the next step here. Alright guys, so that's going to be a good place to cut it off for now. In part 3 we'll come back and we'll have all the decals on the car, and we'll start into some of the weathering processes on the model as well. So until next time, thank you for watching this part guys, and I'll see you in the next part. Take it easy.